Bobby, welcome to the podcast today, buddy.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And well, look, we're excited to have you on. And I do with all of our guests, I ask everybody to give us a little kind of intro into yourself. You've got an awesome resume from experience with the Marines, with college football, to all the different stuff. Would you mind kind of walking us through that as well as kind of your family dynamics?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Ryan. My background does span sports, martial arts, military, private business, and working for a Fortune 100 companies where I retired from just last month. So not unlike most folks that grow up in the South, I'm from a small family, small immediate family, but large, extended family. You know how it is, right? And, throughout grade school and high school, I played sports. My favorite sport was football, obviously. Love football. And that's what I thought I would eventually become, was a football player. But, that didn't quite work out. But, really enjoyed that. And from high school, I went on to college and played football for one semester and, quickly found out that there were others that were a lot better than I was. I don't know if you remember who Jackie Harris was, but he's one of the great tight ends in the NFL. And he played on that team at one semester I was in college. And, after he drugged me about 15 yards, I figured out that, I wasn't going to make it. So, that was funny, but not funny. And after that, life sort of took me to the Marine Corps. My father had a background in the military, being in World War II, Korea and Vietnam 3 times. So, I thought that was a good option. I would explore, what that had to offer. And, extremely glad I did, sort of set the tone for the rest of my life. And, family dynamics, again, came from a small, immediate family, large extended family. Married now, my kids are both grown, became an empty nester last month too. So, going through a bit of a transition with retiring, empty nester, and, standing up a couple of businesses. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
Man, that's a lot in 1 month. All the kids out of the house, retiring. You have any fun trips planned?
Yeah, actually I might go to South Africa. One of my last assignments was in Scravos, Nigeria. And I worked with a lot of South Africans. And, South Africa is really a beautiful country. And even some of the bordering countries like Namibia and places like that, you can go on safaris and kind of see the nicer part of Africa.
I'll tell you this, and I don't want to get too far off point, but I went to Botswana years ago, and we went in August. And it was their river that was there, the Okavango Delta, I believe it was called. And it was like the Lion King when everything was dried up around and they all had to come to the one spot to have water and food. It was absolutely gorgeous. So while you're over there, I would highly recommend you check that out too. So how old are your kids? What are your kids doing now?
Right. So my daughter's 26, Laura Lee. She's working at UT McGovern, preparing for medical school. She's working with little babies and watching the heart surgeries and stuff like that, and doing clinical research. My son, he was playing college football. College baseball. Sorry, he's done with that. He's out in California now, and he's trying to be an actor.
That's awesome. Well, good for them. That sounds like 2 successful kids, which is great.
Yeah, they're trying. They're working hard.
Well, look, Bobby, we're here on the Insurance Leadership Podcast, right? And you didn't say a thing about insurance, obviously. And so one of the things, though, that you're here to talk about is leadership. You just got done writing a book, came out, Lead You, phenomenal book. Was able to read through it a little bit over the past week or so, and some great points in there. It was meant a lot to me. But before we kind of get into the leadership side, like, how long did you spend thinking about this book? How long did it take you to write it? What was your passion kind of with putting it all together?
Yeah, no, first and foremost, thanks for that compliment. It's always good that, people got 1 or 2 things, from the book. That's kind of the mission there. So, 34 years of experience, being privileged to lead other people. I really wanted to pass on the knowledge and approach I have to others who may be starting their leadership journey. I was lucky. I had parents that taught leadership, not formally, but they were leaders. No 2 ways about it. and then, playing football and having good coaches that were leaders. And then to top all that off, being in the Marine Corps, they teach leadership a certain way, and it all begins with self-leadership, right? With leadership traits and principles, the ones you see there in the book. And, a few years back, I said, well, okay, I'm approaching, a retirement phase. Didn't know exactly when I was going to retire, but I'm approaching. So, what can I give back, and what can I do that, I've had a lot of repetitions at. So, well, I'd like to write down my thoughts. So then I started doing research, and, the first research I did was I went to Amazon, right? And there's over 60,000 titles on leadership. Yeah. So, I really had to do a lot of thinking. I didn't want to write just another high-minded leadership book. So I said, okay, let me pull on my experience. And so that brought me back to where I started, with, football and the Marine Corps, and specifically the Marine Corps. So, as I start the book with all those traits, I have 16 traits in there, but the Marine Corps taught us 14. I added, compassion and accountability, because I sort of learned that along the way, to effectively lead yourself and people, most importantly, you definitely have to have some element of compassion and empathy, and, accountability. Man, it's everything, when you're leading yourself to build trust and leading others. So that's kind of how I arrived at lead you.
Okay. Well, so speaking of accountability, how did you handle it? Were you one of those ones who were really good at deadlines, and you said, hey, I'm going to start now, I'm going to be done in the next 2 months writing this book? Did you kind of go on a trip for a week or two, just isolate yourself, or did you spend certain hours a day? I think it was John Grisham said, I write 400 words a day, and that's what he does. I thought that was pretty interesting. But how did you write your book? How'd you come to the process of it?
Yeah, no, before I had no idea, but part of the process of the company that I wrote the book through is that you visit Austin, Texas for 3 days, and you go to a workshop. And man, let me tell you what, this workshop is out of sight. It's not just a functional workshop, but like, in information share, you can't help but, have some of your own stories in there. So it forces you to dig, for the truth. But, back to the process of writing the book, they recommended 300 words a day. So, that was my target. I wouldn't say I'm naturally gifted at deadlines, but rather, I work hard to cultivate an ethic. Whatever I want, I'm going to have it, but I have to prioritize. So I challenge myself in that way. So I wrote anywhere from 300 to 1,000 words a day for 6 months, and I wrote during lunch, at night, on time off, on airplanes, in airports, everywhere, to make the 6 month, deadline.
Wow. Well, good for you, and that's awesome. I want to ask you about one more thing before we jump into kind of the leadership topic. Your time in the military, I know it had a huge impact on you on leadership, and it's had on so many people just their personal discipline and personal accountability as well, which is one of the things I really want to hit on your book. But you were in the military for 4 years. Give us a little summary of your experience in there. What are some of the biggest things you learned? Tell us a little bit, too, on kind of what was that transition like coming back from military life where everything is so focused and everything is so disciplined to coming back to, I guess you would call it the civilian world, where there's not a lot of discipline out there. What was that transition like, and how did that impact you?
Yeah, no, I guess I'll start with boot camp. Boot camp was certainly an eye-opener. I was prepared for it, and having suffered through 2 days playing football in August in South Louisiana. And, my parents were taskmasters, and, so I had an element of discipline, but the Marine Corps, it's a whole nother level, right? It can be, and it is a well-oiled machine. There are follies, here and there, but, by and large, everyone knows their job and knows it extremely well. And, those leadership traits and the discipline, is part of that. And, that's why I learned that in highly effective teams, there's high accountability. So if you didn't do something, you were told very immediately and very directly that, hey, this is how to do it, or you need more training on this. And most of the time, believe it or not, it was direct but constructive, so that was sort of the eye openers. Then, the happenings. I spent a year in Okinawa, which was very, very unique and interesting. And part of that year was 6 months in the Philippines and Subic Bay and stuff like that. So I was able to attend jungle environment survival training. It was probably one of my more favorite classes that I had in the Marine Corps. It was 5 days sort of in the jungle. And
did they give you enough food? Did you have food when you went out there? Did they give you a pack of food, or was it good luck finding your food for the next 5 days?
Good luck finding your food, but so
I'd have been out right there, Bobby.
Before you go to the training, they take you to this small zoo, right, where you see the monkeys and different things. But in that zoo are cobras, right? And I don't know if you know a lot about cobras, but a cobra can stand up, half as tall as it is long, right? So if a cobra's, say 8 feet long, it can stand 4 feet up, right? And when you see a cobra sort of doing this, it's, it's a little bit eerie. And then the next day, you're going into the jungle, right?
Everything that moves, you're kind of looking at a little bit closer.
So exactly. And I don't know if you heard the term triple canopy.
I haven't.
Right. So that means sort of level of the density of vegetation in the jungle. And when you get into triple canopy, it's like nighttime, right? It could be 12 noon in the daytime, but it looks like night. So, you're holding on to the person in front of you, going up and down and, all these things. But our guides on that training and our instructors were Negritos, right? The indigenous people from the Philippines before the Spaniards, got there. And look, they knew every inch of the jungle. They knew what vines to get water from. They knew how to kill bamboo bats. We cooked rice in bamboo stalk. This is a very neat experience. And, it really was my first test and perspective on, survival, right? Because you go in there, that's why they call it jungle survival environment training, but you go in there with nothing, right? And you basically live off the land. Well,
that's impressive. Thank you for your service, first of all. That's pretty awesome. You hear that and you just realize how, I won't call myself a pansy, but how weak we are when you hear stories like that. It's pretty awesome. So thank you.
Yeah, we think we're tough until we go to those type of things.
That's right. Those environments.
You know really quick that maybe you're not so tough.
That's exactly right.
But to build on that, after I left Okinawa, I was assigned to 29 Palms Marine Corps Air Ground Combat Center, and shortly after that was Desert Storm. So I was in Desert Storm for a little over 3 months, and it didn't last very long, but that gave me a 3 month limited view into the realities of war. It was a lot. The Gulf War was a lot different than the global war on terror that we've had for the last 20 years. It maybe concluded last year, whatever. But still, we constructed an EPW camp, right? So we processed all the Iraqis, that were captured, and that gives you a view into the human side of war. Yeah,
that's tough. And I appreciate you sharing that and everything you did for our country and all the military and veterans out there. It's awesome, the sacrifice y'all make. So thank you again for that. I appreciate it, Bobby.
Oh, you're welcome. It's my privilege.
Well, let me hop into some of the leadership stuff with you now today. I want to jump in. One of the main sections I want to hit on today is kind of personal development, accountability, but I got kind of some quicker questions for you to start with, if that's okay. So one of my first ones is, do you think everyone has the ability to lead?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say everyone has the ability to lead themselves.
Yep.
We all control our thoughts, decisions, choices, and actions.
That's right.
The other side of that is I would say there are some people who do not belong, leading others.
Yep.
We can all lead ourselves, and, if we have people skills and we're collaborators and we're constructive, then we got a good shot at leading others, plus if we got a really strong desire, right?
That's right.
But there are definitely some people that don't belong in charge of other humans.
Yeah, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about a little bit, because no one ever talks about, people who don't need to be leaders, right? You hear all this stuff about leadership and, how to be a better leader and how to be an effective leader and all this. And, there's some people with their character traits and just how they treat people and how they act and their self-discipline. It's like, man, you do not need to be in leadership, So I want to hit that in just a little bit. Let me ask you this, kind of looking at people from a leadership standpoint, do you think that we're born with leadership skills, or do you think it's kind of the environments that we grow up in? How do you think people develop those leadership skills quicker than other people do?
Yeah, another, great question. I guess some people are predisposed, right, to be leaders, right? They have some element of drive, some element of, charisma, stuff like that. But, leadership is something that has to be taught. And first I ask people to check what kind of drive they have, because, to be a leader and do it day in, day out, do it consistently, we're never going to be perfect, but, you always have to have that desire to put others before yourself, right? And it's a hard thing. It's hard for everyone, but it's something that people will need to sort of come to terms with. Also I would say, what kind of resilience and endurance do people have, right? Because the leader's journey, it's long and it never ends. I had 34 years, until I retired, and, I never felt like I was perfect. There was always more to learn. So, that takes a lot of resilience. Even at senior level or mastery, you're going to have some days where you ask yourself, man, what was that? What kind of performance did I turn in today? So.
Yeah, that's great. I love how you said drive. That is something that I don't necessarily always hear people peg that as just one characteristic of leadership, but I would agree with you. I think drive is something that inspires others, right? It's setting the goal, setting the vision. You hear it kind of said in those ways, but really drive is an underlying factor of the vision to kind of press forward. So if someone does not know, I tell my team all the time, I said, look, everyone is a leader. Whether you're leading your families, whether you're leading yourself, whether you're leading the softball team for your kids, whether it's your neighborhood watch program, right? Like we all have some sort of capacity that we can lead in. If someone doesn't realize what leadership skills they have or they possess, how would you kind of tell them to kind of maybe look and analyze to be able to figure out what their leadership skills are?
Yeah, there's actually 6 questions, and you'll see them there in the book. First one is, do you have the grit to make disliked decisions, right? Because, part of being a leader is being sovereign, right, and having values. Because, like, if you waver every time you get challenged, well, then you're not making an impact in what's different about you as a leader. The other one is, are you willing to embrace self-awareness and the demands of self-leadership, right? Like, being a leader is always being self-aware. Your appearance, your bearing, your tone, stuff like that. And, there's demands, like before you go to work or in your military, before you're with your team, you have a family. There's so many other elements of life, right? So it's very demanding. Are you willing to take accountability for your actions and decisions, right? If you make a bad decision, you have to, as a leader, you have to take accountability. If you point at others, you're automatically discredited, right? Which goes back sort of to trust. It's very hard to gain trust, very easy to lose it. It's one of those things that you sort of have to always build and protect. And here's the thing too, are you willing to struggle for self-improvement, right? Because at some point you get to the point of diminishing returns, but there's more you can do as a leader. And that's kind of when the struggle comes. I found like the last 5 to 7 years of my career were the hardest, because I had mastered so many things over 28 to 30 years, right? But I wanted to get better. Every day I woke up, I wanted to get better as a leader, and that can be a struggle. And last, I would say, are you willing to build and protect trust with yourself and others? Right? Because going back to leading self, it's very hard to trust others if you don't trust yourself. So you're going to have to protect your self-trust. And, keeping your self-trust is doing the things you say you're going to do day in and day out, right? Your family, your belief system, your finances, right? Your physical health, right? And that's a bear, it's kind of a bear to, keep up with all that.
That's right. I got a mentor of mine who told me, he said, do the things you need to do when you need to do them. Then there will come a time that you can do the things you want to do when you want to do them. And he talked about that personal accountability. I love that statement. And you talk on trust as well. I think it was Warren Buffett who was the one who said it takes 20 years to build a reputation and 20 seconds to lose it. And that's one of the truest quotes I've heard. And as a leader, you got to remember that you can't have downtime. you can't let your guard down. You can't let your character drop. Otherwise, it could ruin what you built up into that point.
Man, I've seen that movie play out so many times in 34 years. And again, I'm not perfect. I've had my struggles, where I've drifted, but that is a true statement. That's why it's important to protect trust.
Well, let me hit the point that I've been most excited to kind of hit with you, the kind of the personal development, personal accountability. I have to assume that the Marines, you were already disciplined with football and two-a-days and, early morning workouts growing up as a kid. I have to know the Marines kind of helped discipline you there. But when it comes to personal accountability and self-discipline, what would you say are the biggest factors there as a leader, why you have to have them, why it's so important to kind of make sure that's in kind of your everyday routine of improving and getting better?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that question are the hardest traits, to master. So first, let's look at the psychological tool set, right? I would say emotional control is number one, right? Keeping your bearing in all situations is very important because people are looking at you, not only your subordinates, your peers, but, superiors, your supervisors, what have you, however you want to, term those people. And if you don't keep your bearing in certain situations, that could lead to lack of opportunities, right? So, it doesn't matter, because a lot of time in business, people will try to elicit an emotional response, right? And 9 times out of 10, especially probably the last 10 to 15 years of my career, I just, wouldn't give them any kind of emotional response, so emotional control, managing focus and compartmentalization would probably be next. A lot of people say manage time, but it's more about managing focus.
So when you say, let me ask you a question off that. So you talk about managing focus, managing time. I agree with you. We actually just got out of a meeting a little bit ago this morning. We were talking about kind of some of the things, when things are going good, sometimes distractions can show up at your doorstep, dressed like opportunities. That's not my quote, that's someone else's quote, but I loved it. And we got into talking about focus and time and discipline with your time, but really it came back to the focus. Hit on that, why it's so important to have something you're focused on and not 20 different things where you kind of like let all the balls drop because you're trying to do so many things, but really kind of hammering in on maybe 1 or 2 key goals, key focuses, key visions for whether it's leading yourself, your company, or your family, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, so the more, so the whole idea about leadership is to be effective, okay? So if I I can push the ball 2 yards doing 20 things, or I can push the ball 15 yards doing 1 or 2 things very well, right? So, again, I learned so many things, and like at the end of my career, I wish I would have known earlier, right? Or, had that self-awareness. But like probably the last 5 to 7 years of my career, I pick 1 to 3 things a day to do extremely well. And it usually ended up as 1, right? Or 2 sometimes, but usually 1. And I found that I got way more mileage from focusing on one thing and doing it extremely well, something that could, quote unquote, move the needle, right? Or move the ball. And there's temptation in that, right? So we all have lists, right? We do all these prioritizations in seriatim, and it's easy to reach down to the bottom and get one of those easy ones, right? To make yourself feel good, to get that dopamine. Oh, I finished that. But, for me, really, I wanted to attack the hardest things first and focus on 1 to 3 things. And again, it always came back to one that I could do very well.
Well, that's good. So what did you do when you set goals, right? You set maybe a quarterly goal or an annual goal, and you have more than one goal, right? Typically when you're setting quarterly or annually, you may have 1 or 2 for your financial, you may have 1 or 2 for, physical goals or mental goals or whatever the case may be. What does your goal setting process look like?
Yeah, no, it depends on the goal, but largely I work with the end in mind. So in other words, what does good look like to me, or what does good look like to my customer? How do they define success? And then I'll back engineer into manageable sub goals, right? In some corporate circles, you may have heard it called strategic blueprinting, right? Where you have success, and then what's the last step before success, and then finally you get back to the origin, like where am I at? And I find that, it's an easy exercise, and the reason I do that is it provides clarity. It helps me align my resources I might need. And moreover, it develops a line of sight where I can set personal accountability mentally, right? Instead of like having a goal and say, okay, every day I'm going to wake up and just work towards that goal. Well, for me, that doesn't work. I have to set up small sub goals, right, that are manageable, that I can actually achieve and not always have the end in mind. I think that's the pitfall of goals and dreams. People always thinking about the end state when we should break them down into smaller sub goals, right? You're more likely, to get to the top of the mountain.
We say all the time, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? That's kind of one of those. So if you don't hit a goal, let me ask you this, because this can vary by situation, but let's just say you don't hit a goal and say something silly. Maybe the goal is to lose 5 pounds in a quarter or whatever the case may be. Are you one of the people who automatically move that goal to your next quarter if you missed it? Or do you move it off the list? What's kind of your process there if you don't always reach the goal in the time frame that you had it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a real good discussion. So I'm selective about the goals that I put on my list or I have for the quarter. My thinking, if it merits priority, then I believe it's worth doing. So the goal is going to stay on the list, right? And thinking quickly, I'll give you a couple of examples. So when I was young, I was in Taekwondo, and up until the Marine Corps, I'd got up to like blue belt or purple belt. And then when I joined the Marine Corps, I didn't, I was never in one place long enough to keep up with the progression, right? Well, later in life, when I was 35 and had a stable job at a refinery in Pascagoula, Mississippi, I went back and I achieved my black belt at 35, right? And eventually got up to second degree, black belt. But like for me, if I plant something in my mind and it's important, I have to finish it, right? No matter if it's, finishing it at the end of the week or, years later. Same thing with college degree, right? I washed out of college football, went to the Marine Corps, had an opportunity for distance education, but with deploying and everything, it just, for me, it was too much to manage. So when I was 47, I went back to school. And I spent 4 years doing a degree online and graduated with a bachelor's in intelligence and a minor in international relations, right? So I'm always going to say if it's worth doing, it has to be finished.
I like it.
I hope that helps.
No, I'm the same way. I'm the same way. I don't like to feel, if I don't hit a goal, I don't like to feel like I quit either. I think there's a little bit of that in me if I don't keep it on the list to try to knock it out. Now, sometimes priorities do change, right? And you might want to reprioritize that, or it's not worth what it was worth at some point or another. So I'm with you on that. Look, kind of last question before we get close. I know we're hitting kind of on the time frames. I want to get into the people and leadership qualities of people that should not be leading? Because this is something we didn't talk about, and you kind of hit on it a little bit earlier. But what are some of the things that, if you're in leadership, and these are some traits maybe that you've seen in your own life, or maybe you've seen in other people's life, what are some of the red flags there of people who should not be leading? Maybe they need to lead themselves, and maybe they need to lead themselves better, but you don't need to bring these qualities to the table if you are a leader. Could you hit on that for a little bit?
Yeah, I got a lot of energy around that. I would say probably my top three would be poor interpersonal skills. Number two would be lack of compassion, which we sort of already touched on, because it's all about people. I ended up as a servant leader, so people were the most important thing to me. Those relationships were precious to me. And to round that out, probably irrational or emotional people. And that goes back to days in football and the Marine Corps. If the team captain got excited, or the platoon sergeant, or whomever was leading that mission, got irrational and emotional, and I saw that firsthand. That's why I'm using it as an example. Then it causes others to lose belief.
That's right.
Right.
It does. No, that's exactly right. So let me ask you this: if someone's working with someone, let's just say my boss or my supervisor is demonstrating some of those. Maybe they're irrational, maybe they have no compassion, or whatever the case may be. It might be weird for me to approach them about some of that, right? What would you say to the person who maybe is in a position right now and they see those leadership qualities in their leader? You kind of got some different things like, hey, I can just sit here and continue to take it, I can quit. Those are two different type things. But if you were to address that with the leader, how would you bring that up? What would be your way to approach that with them?
Yeah, no, excellent. I'm 53. I grew up where it was, don't speak until you're spoken to, that sort of thing. Right. No, not necessarily, in my house. We always had healthy discussions, but like in the Marine Corps, business after that in the oil field, it was kind of a one-way thing, right? And, so I'm just building up to say that the number one thing I would do if I experienced that is give feedback, right? Today, I think in corporate America, and it's permeating to other parts of society and companies, is there should be a healthy two-way feedback loop. And if there's not, that's a red flag. But I would say first and foremost is give the person direct feedback. Hey, I wanted to make you aware of this interchange and, what my perception was of it. There might be some opportunity for us to, communicate in a different way, right? Because, as a leader or subordinate, you always want to preserve, you always want to let the other person save face, right? You never want to leave on, sort of a negative note, because, that doesn't build trust, right? And that goes on to, you want to accomplish the mission or
you're not doing it to beat them up. You're doing it to try to make it a better mission and better playing field while you're trying to reach that goal,
exactly.
Right?
It's all about, finding what people do best and improving them. And, that's why it's important as a leader to take feedback.
No, that's good. Well, speaking of leadership, kind of one of the last things I wanted to hit with you, Rubicon COA, your leadership training program. Man, tell us about it. Who's it for? What are they learning? Give us some kind of the big golden nuggets on that.
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So the Rubicon COA, is formed out of a passion to improve others, right? And there's three entities. There's the book, Lead You, which there will be two more books, coming, Leading Teams and Leading Through Change, which is my favorite, because if we learn to lead through change, we're going to be successful no matter what change comes at us. And aside from that, we have the Stronger You coaching program, where we're focusing on CEOs, executives, and business owners. A lot of CEOs and executives, business owners, they know how to do the functional things good, but sometimes they fall a little bit short on self-leadership, right? So we teach 9 different unique success patterns, because life and performance is all about patterns. And aside from that, we have live immersive events. Our first event is going to be June 26th through 30th at the YO Ranch in Kerrville, Texas. And myself and 3 other cadre will take 15 or 16 students out there, from ages, 18 to wherever. and teach them about self-leadership, teamwork, teach them to lead through change. There's going to be a lot of skills development. And at the end, we have a lot of fun and we have adventure.
Well, I watched the video on that yesterday, and that looked pretty cool. That looks like it's going to be a good, intensive leadership program. What is that one, 4 days? Am I correct on that?
For 4 days, yes.
4 days. Man, that's awesome. Well, Bobby, you're knocking it out of the park there, man. I thank you for writing this book. I picked up a lot of good nuggets out of it, and your leadership program and teaching people and just your self-leadership and compassion. I wish more men were like that, so I appreciate that. Can't tell you enough.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan. It was my pleasure to be here, and thanks for buying the book and reading the book. And if you don't mind, please leave a review.
Definitely will, Bobby, definitely will. Well, look, that wraps up another episode of the Insurance Leadership Podcast. We thank you for listening in, and remember, a good plan today is better than a great plan months from now. Thank you so much.